My sister's life has always been a storm I could never fully escape, even from miles away. She's younger than me by 2 years, but it sometimes felt like she'd been born with an innate talent for chaos. Addiction wasn't just a part of hurt, was the lens through which she saw the world. And everyone else was either a prop in her story or a casualty. I remember being a teenager and seeing her spiral for the first time, thinking naively that she'd eventually figure it out. By the time I turned 18, it was painfully clear she wasn't going to figure it out on her own. From the beginning, the patterns were unmistakable. Do-I's wrecked cars, abrupt disappearances, broken promises, sometimes all within a single week. Our parents would bail her out, usually with money, a ride, or just forgiveness. She always seemed to have a talent for bending reality to suit her needs. The earliest memory I have is of her vanishing for a weekend, only to show up at our doorstep Sunday night with an apologetic smile and a story about being stuck at a friend's place. That was nothing compared to what would come later. But even then, the seeds of family enabling had been planted. Her children, 3 beautiful kids now, were born into this whirlwind. Their births should have been a turning point, a reason to seek help, a chance for responsibility. But instead, her addiction clung to her tighter than any bond with her children could. Even while pregnant, she disappeared for weeks, leaving our parents scrambling to provide stability. My sister never admitted she had a problem. She claimed she could handle it, that everything was under control, but her history screamed otherwise. I grew up loving her fiercely, despite everything. It wasn't her fault, I told myself, that she struggled. Addiction is a disease, people said. But witnessing the destruction firsthand, the smashed cars, the frantic phone calls from hospitals, the tears of my parents, it was hard to reconcile love with the utter chaos she left behind. And yet our family kept bailing her out. Even I, despite knowing better, often slipped into the pattern of rescuing her, answering her calls at 2 a.m., lending her money, or covering up her mistakes. The tipping point didn't happen all at once. It was the accumulation of years, over a decade of repeated offenses. But there was a moment I remember vividly, like a lightning strike cutting through fog. She had stolen from me, a personal betrayal that made it impossible to ignore. She had snuck drugs into my home, knowingly bringing unsafe influences into my sanctuary. And yet, when I confronted her, it was as if nothing had happened. That's when I realized that enabling her wasn't just helping her, was allowing her to endanger my life and the lives of those around her. Even as I considered cutting ties, guilt gnawed at me. My parents had spent years caring for her, making excuses, and bending over backward to keep her afloat. Their love was real, but it came at the cost of their own peace. Every family gathering carried the undercurrent of her chaos. Whispered conversations, side glances, sudden phone calls. She had a way of inserting herself into every story, every plan, every decision, and leaving destruction in her wake. Her disappearances became a recurring nightmare. She would vanish for days or even weeks, sometimes during critical moments in her children's lives. I remember one particularly harrowing episode. She had been missing for 3 weeks. Not a word to anyone, not her parents, not me, not even the children. The house felt emptier, quieter, but the tension was palpable. My parents were frantic, desperate to track her down. I was torn between fear for her safety and anger at the repeated pattern. When she finally returned, it was like nothing had happened. Her smile was casual, almost rehearsed, as if 3 weeks of silence and chaos were minor inconveniences. rather than monumental failures. Watching my parents take the kids temporarily, doing the heavy lifting that should have been her responsibility, was simultaneously heart-drenching and infuriating. They were exhausted, worn down by years of caregiving and emotional labor. And yet, even as they struggled, there was the unspoken expectation that the next generation, my generation, would somehow step in where she failed. I couldn't help but notice the inequity. My other siblings, who lived more independent, stable lives, were not pressured in the same way. It was always me, because I was single, childless, and in the same generation. Love for my nieces and nephews complicated everything. I adored them with a depth that sometimes made my chest ache. But love, I realized, did not obligate me to assume the responsibilities of someone who had repeatedly abdicated them. My life was my own. I had no childcare infrastructure, no financial support, and I had chosen not to have children. I was not equipped, emotionally or practically, to fill the gaps left by my sister's choices. And yet, the family pressure was immense. Their disappointment, their guilt-tripping, their unspoken judgment hovered over every conversation, every text, every visit. Therapist sessions became my sanctuary. I would recount the pattern of enabling, the betrayals, the disappearances, and hear the words I needed to hear. It was okay to say no. Setting boundaries did not make me a bad person. Protecting myself did not equate to abandoning my nieces and nephews entirely. And yet, the pull of family expectation remained a powerful force. It was a tug-of-war between my own needs and the relentless demands of a chaotic family dynamic. Even amidst all this, I tried to understand my sister. Addiction warps reality, twists intentions, and erodes self. But understanding did not excuse theft, dangerous behavior, or the emotional harm inflicted on those around her. There came a point when love had to coexist with limits. Protecting myself, setting boundaries, and refusing to be a surrogate parent were acts of survival, not cruelty. As I stood at this crossroads, I realized the long-term patterns were unlikely to change unless the system enabling her was disrupted. My refusal to provide cars, money, or shelter was a hard line drawn in the sand. I was no longer willing to participate in the cycle that had defined our family for more than a decade. The fear of being labeled selfish or uncaring loomed large, but so did the need to reclaim my own life. The moment I took my car back from her felt symbolic. It wasn't just about the vehicle. It was reclaiming autonomy, setting boundaries, and refusing to allow her choices to control mine. The backlash from my family was immediate. Their disappointment, their anger, their insistence that I owe her this kind of help was suffocating. And yet, I held my ground. It was the first step in a journey that would demand strength, resilience, and an unwavering commitment to myself. Over time, I began to see the pattern more clearly. My family's love, while genuine, had become a mechanism that enabled her destruction. Every intervention, every bailout, every just this once moment reinforced the cycle. By stepping back, I wasn't abandoning her children. I was refusing to perpetuate a system that allowed chaos to flourish. The distinction was subtle but vital. Love did not mean submission to irresponsibility. Even now, recounting these memories, the tension of those years is palpable. There were moments of heartbreak seeing my sister with her children, knowing the choices she had made and feeling powerless to protect them. But there were also moments of clarity, understanding that my own life, my own boundaries, and my own sense of responsibility were not negotiable. The path forward would require difficult conversations, unwavering resolve, and the willingness to endure guilt and anger from those I loved. The story of my sister's spiral is not unique. Families everywhere struggle with addiction, enabling, and the heartbreak of watching someone they love self-destruct. But it is intensely personal, a mosaic of small betrayals, fleeting joys, and the slow accumulation of lessons learned the hard way. And for me, the lesson was clear. Love without boundaries can be dangerous, and protecting oneself is not an act of abandonment, it is an act of survival. The next chapter of my life would be defined by that understanding. It would require courage, empathy, and a steadfast refusal to be drawn back into a cycle that had cost so much already. And yet, even as I prepared for this shift, the weight of family expectation, societal norms, and personal guilt pressed down on me like a storm cloud threatening to break. This was only the beginning, the first chapter of reclaiming my life from the shadows of addiction that had loomed over us for far too long. The moment I decided to stop enabling my sister, everything changed. At first, I thought it would be simple. Just reclaim my car, refuse to loan her money, and set firm boundaries. But I underestimated the emotional fallout, both within myself and from the family. The act of saying no felt like stepping onto a battlefield with invisible enemies, guilt, expectation, and love all colliding in a confusing, painful storm. I remember the first confrontation vividly. My sister leaned against my kitchen counter, smirking as if she already knew how this would end. "You're really going to do this?" she asked casually, the words heavy with mockery disguised as surprise. I nodded, feeling a mix of fear and determination tighten in my chest. Her response was classic: denial, deflection, and manipulation. She claimed she'd changed, that she wasn't like that anymore, and tried to guilt me with memories of childhood favors and imagined debts. It was exhausting to listen to, but I held firm. I couldn't let her words sway me, no matter how familiar or comforting they sounded. The truth was stark. She had stolen from me, brought drugs into my home, and endangered not only herself, but my life and well-being. And this was not a one-time occurrence. It was a consistent pattern over years. The family's reaction was even more complicated. My parents, whose love for her was absolute, felt betrayed by my refusal to step in. "You're in the same generation," my mother said, her voice trembling with a mix of disappointment and fear. "It should be your responsibility to—" Every word felt like a hammer, striking at the foundation of the choices I had been trying to make for myself. My father's quiet disapproval was heavier than any argument. His sadness spoke volumes about the family dynamics I was challenging. Even within myself, the struggle was real. One loved my nieces and nephews deeply, but I could not and would not be their full-time caregiver. My life was already built around the reality of being single, financially independent, and child-free by choice. I had no resources for childcare, no financial safety net to absorb the weight of raising 3 children who were, in essence, already living in a state of instability due to their mother's choices. The internal battle between love, guilt, and practicality became a daily torment. The tipping point came during her most recent disappearance, a 3-week blackout where not a single word reached any of us. My parents scrambled to locate her, calling hospitals, friends, and even law enforcement, while I stayed in the background, watching history repeat itself. When she finally resurfaced, she acted as though nothing had happened. The casualness with which she re-entered her children's lives was infuriating. My father took the kids temporarily, a decision driven by necessity, but the expectations soon shifted. my parents began pressuring me to take them full-time. "You're the one in the same generation," they said, ignoring my siblings entirely. The inequity stung, cutting deep into my sense of fairness and personal autonomy. Setting boundaries became a skill I had to learn in real time. I had to navigate a delicate balance between firmness and empathy. Saying no was not about abandoning my nieces and nephews. It was about protecting myself from enabling behavior that could compromise my safety and stability. I reminded myself that my role could still be loving, supportive, and present, just not at the cost of my own life. I could spend time with them, care for them occasionally, and maintain a meaningful relationship without assuming the full responsibilities of parenthood. Therapy became my anchor. My sessions provided clarity in the chaos, giving words to feelings that had been tangled in guilt for years. "It's okay to say no," my therapist reminded me repeatedly. "Your boundaries are not selfish. They are necessary for your survival and mental health." I clung to this mantra as my family's pressure mounted, a shield against their guilt-tripping and manipulation. Every conversation with my parents became a negotiation of sorts, testing the strength of my resolve. They would appeal to emotion, history, and moral obligation, but I held my ground. The backlash was intense. My sister, sensing the shift, escalated her attempts at manipulation. She would call at odd hours, leave passive-aggressive messages, or attempt to guilt me by highlighting her struggles and the sacrifices she had supposedly made. Friends and extended family occasionally sided with her, framing my refusal as cruelty or indifference. It was exhausting, but I learned to separate intention from action. My intention was not to harm. My action was to protect. Financial independence became a cornerstone of my boundary. I stopped giving her money, reclaiming my autonomy and sending a clear message. Her problems were hers to manage, not mine. My car was no longer a tool for enabling her. It was a symbol of my agency. These tangible boundaries, reinforced by emotional and psychological clarity, helped me navigate the tense landscape of family obligation. Emotionally, the process was grueling. I wrestled with waves of guilt and doubt, questioning whether I was doing the right thing. Every time I saw my nieces and nephews, I felt a pang of sadness for what they had endured and a complex mixture of love and helplessness. Yet, I also felt a growing sense of empowerment, realizing that my choices were deliberate, informed, and protective. I could love without losing myself, a lesson hard-earned over years of family chaos. I also became acutely aware of the dynamics of enabling. Each time my sister had relied on family support, the consequences for all of us multiplied. Cars were wrecked, finances strained, and emotional resources depleted. By stepping back, I was not abandoning her, but disrupting a cycle that had allowed destruction to continue unchecked. My refusal to be a passive participant became a statement. Love and care have limits, and boundaries are acts of respect for oneself and others. Even as I reinforced my boundaries, I worked to maintain connection with my nieces and nephews. I spent time with them when I could, created memories, and offered stability within my capacity. Love, without responsibility for their full-time care, became a new model of engagement, one that respected both my limits and their needs. It was a delicate balance, requiring constant vigilance and emotional intelligence. Through this process, I learned that family loyalty does not equate to personal sacrifice at all costs. My role within the family could evolve, defined by conscious choice rather than default obligation. I discovered the power of agency, the necessity of self-respect, and the importance of modeling boundaries for future generations. By refusing to be drawn into chaos, I was not turning my back on those I loved. I was preserving my ability to engage meaningfully and sustainably. Ultimately, drawing boundaries was less about confrontation and more about self-preservation. It was about making a deliberate choice to engage with my family and my life on my own terms. My sister's addiction was her battle, and I could offer love and support without becoming complicit in enabling harmful behavior. The family backlash was painful, but it also clarified who truly respected my choices and who was invested in perpetuating dysfunction. The experience was transformative. I learned to navigate guilt, emotional manipulation, and familial expectation with clarity and compassion. I discovered that setting limits is not abandonment, it is a form of protection and a pathway to sustainable relationships. By drawing these lines, I was able to carve out space for my life, my mental health, and my autonomy, while still maintaining love and care for my nieces and nephews. The aftermath of setting boundaries was a landscape I had never navigated before. My family's reactions ranged from stunned silence to overt criticism, yet the internal relief I felt was profound. For the first time in years, I was living according to my own values rather than the unspoken rules of enabling. It wasn't easy. Every conversation carried the weight of expectation. Every interaction with my sister threatened to unravel the fragile boundaries I had established. But slowly, I began to see the fruits of my decision. The first few weeks were the hardest. My parents were visibly disappointed, their attempts to guilt me into compliance frequent and emotionally charged. "You're her sister. It should be your responsibility," my mother said, her voice teetering between anger and pleading. My father, quieter but no less heavy, would shake his head at family gatherings, a silent reproach that cut deeper than words. I braced myself each time, knowing that standing firm meant enduring judgment from those I loved. Yet, as the days passed, I noticed subtle shifts. My own sense of agency, my clarity of purpose, and my emotional stability were improving. I became acutely aware of the emotional cost of past enabling. For years, my love for my sister had been entangled with guilt, fear, and exhaustion. Each time I stepped in, I felt a fleeting sense of relief, quickly followed by the overwhelming weight of resentment and worry. Now, by maintaining boundaries, I could engage with my family without sacrificing my mental health. I could love my nieces and nephews without becoming a surrogate parent, and I could offer support without compromising my safety. This distinction, once elusive, had become a guiding principle in every interaction. My sister's reaction to my refusal was predictably turbulent. She oscillated between anger, attempts at manipulation, and moments of feigned vulnerability. I remember one night she appeared at my door, teary-eyed and pleading. "You don't understand. I need help," she whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of desperation and expectation. I listened, offering empathy but no acquiescence. I explained, calmly but firmly, that while I loved her and wanted her to succeed, I could no longer participate in enabling behavior. The conversation ended without resolution, yet it reinforced the clarity I had gained. Boundaries were not negotiable. The challenge extended beyond my immediate family. Extended relatives, friends, and even some co-workers weighed in, often unknowingly reinforcing the pressure I faced. "It's just temporary," they would say. "You'll regret it later if you don't help." Each comment was a test of resolve. But I began to develop a mental framework for handling these intrusions. Love and empathy did not require submission or compromise. I could care for others while protecting myself, concept that had taken years to internalize. Simultaneously, I focused on creating moments of stability and joy with my nieces and nephews. Visits became structured, predictable, and safe. I engaged with them on my terms, ensuring that interactions were positive and nurturing, yet bounded by clear limits. This approach allowed me to cultivate meaningful relationships without assuming full responsibility for their day-to-day care. Over time, I noticed that my consistent presence, even if limited, provided them with stability and reassurance. Love, I realized, could exist without constant sacrifice. Emotionally, the process was not linear. Waves of guilt, anxiety, and fear would occasionally resurface, particularly when I observed the consequences of my sister's choices. However, these moments became opportunities for reflection rather than triggers for action. I learned to differentiate between emotional impulses and rational decisions, allowing me to respond to crises thoughtfully rather than react. Therapy continued to be an invaluable resource, providing tools to navigate complex emotions and reinforcing the legitimacy of my choices. Financial independence and personal safety remained central to my strategy. I maintained clear boundaries regarding money, property, and access to my home. My car, my savings, and my personal space were no longer negotiable. These tangible boundaries served as both protective measures and symbols of autonomy, reinforcing the principle that enabling destructive behavior was not an obligation but a choice, and one I would no longer make. As time went on, subtle shifts in family dynamics became apparent, while tension remained. There was a growing recognition, sometimes unspoken, that my stance was deliberate, considered, and non-negotiable. My parents, though initially resistant, began to accept that their expectations could not override my autonomy. Conversations became less accusatory and more measured, though emotional undercurrents persisted. I understood that change would be gradual, and that patience and consistency were essential. I also grappled with the ethical dimension of my decision. Could I justify refusing to take the children when their mother repeatedly chose addiction? The answer emerged through reflection and guidance from my therapist: yes. Loving someone does not obligate you to assume responsibilities that jeopardize your well-being or contravene your values. In fact, maintaining boundaries is a form of ethical engagement, modeling responsible behavior and creating sustainable opportunities for meaningful relationships. One of the most challenging aspects was balancing love with detachment. I had to accept that my sister might continue to make harmful choices and that some consequences were inevitable. This acceptance did not diminish my love. It clarified the limits of my responsibility. I could be present, supportive, and caring without being complicit. I could offer guidance and structure within my capacity, without sacrificing my own stability. Over time, I found empowerment in saying no. Each refusal was an assertion of my agency, a declaration that my life was not subject to the whims of someone else's choices. The process was neither easy nor comfortable, but it was transformative. I discovered the strength to navigate familial expectation, societal judgment, and personal guilt, while maintaining integrity and compassion. Ultimately, choosing myself did not mean abandoning my family. It meant engaging differently, with clarity, purpose, and intent. I could love my nieces and nephews, provide support, and maintain meaningful connections without assuming full responsibility for their care. I could support my sister in seeking help without enabling harmful behavior. Boundaries became a framework for sustainable love, rather than a barrier to connection. In reflecting on this journey, I recognize that the most profound lesson is the balance between empathy and self-preservation. Love is not synonymous with sacrifice. It can coexist with limits, boundaries, and self. By choosing myself, I honored my capacity to engage meaningfully, sustainably, and compassionately. I also created space for my nieces and nephews to experience love and stability. Even amid the chaos of their mother's choices, this chapter of my life is ongoing, a continuous negotiation of love, responsibility, and personal integrity. I have learned that it is possible to stand firm, maintain compassion, and assert boundaries simultaneously. I have discovered that saying no, when necessary, is not a failure of love, but a triumph of clarity, self-respect, and ethical engagement. And most importantly, I have found that protecting myself allows me to engage with others, especially those I love, in a way that is meaningful, sustainable, and profoundly human. In the end, I am not defined by my sister's choices, nor am I responsible for undoing decades of chaos. I am defined by my ability to navigate complexity with integrity, to love without losing myself, and to stand firm in the face of pressure, guilt, and expectation. This is the journey of learning to choose myself, while continuing to love those who need me on my terms, within my capacity and with unwavering compassion,